campus director for Schiller University in Paris, and I am really delighted to be welcoming today Mr. David Van Cleve, head of the press section at the US Embassy in Paris. And he's going to speak about his career path and to help us understand the necessary steps to become a Foreign Service officer in the US. At Schiller, we have a lot of students studying international relations and diplomacy at undergraduate and graduate levels. And some of our students are, of course, dreaming of joining the Foreign Service. Even though everybody attending this event tonight is not an American national, there are also positions available in the Foreign Service for non-American nationals, and Mr. Van Cleve will also speak about that. Mr. Van Cleve is currently the information officer at the American Embassy and serves as the embassy spokesman. I think he must love Paris, and I'm sure he could give his presentation in French, as it is his second mission here, and he studied at ENA, the famous French administration school, in 2009, before taking the position of political counselor at the American Embassy. And he studied also at Sciences Po when doing his undergraduate at Tufts University. He also has an MSc in international relations from the London School of Economics and a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. So he served in Budapest, also in Basel, in Singapore, and he also served in Islamabad as the first Foreign Service officer to run the Combating Violent Extremism Office. He also worked in Washington on the French desk. So we are really, really grateful to Mr. Van Cleve for his time and his kindness to be with us tonight to share his experience. And please join me in welcoming him and prepare your question that you would be able to give at the end of the presentation. You can give them orally, or you can also write them in the chat. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. And please, Mr. Van Cleve, we're listening to you.
Thank you very much. Merci bien, c'est gentil. It's a pleasure to see all of your names on the screen, but if you feel comfortable putting your face up or turning on your camera, then I won't feel like I'm
not doing that. Come on.
Yes, there's at least one person, so nice to see you. I am joined, incidentally, by my colleague from the U.S. Embassy, Maureen Siegel, who is waving to you now. Maureen has a special distinction of being both American and French. So she is working on, she's a big expert on all educational exchanges. And so she will also, among other things today, be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions and you're feeling shy and don't want to yell them out across the screen, she will track them and read them to me in due course. So what I'm proposing to do is to talk to you for 20 or 25 minutes, and then open it up really to open it up for your questions, because I'm sure you probably have many more interesting things to ask about than just me talking about myself, although it is a very fascinating subject. But in any event, I'm very happy to speak a little bit about what the process is for becoming an American diplomat, and also what our diplomatic missions look like, which include a ferocious number of non-diplomats like Maureen, who are subject matter experts in their own fields and who are employed as locally engaged staff. So as an American diplomat, I move around from place to place. As a friend of mine used to say, as soon as I know how to drive around whatever city I'm living in, it's time to pack up and move to a new place. But we are joined by, very critically, by here in Paris, we have about 400 Americans like me and about 600 locally engaged staff. So even more locally engaged staff like Maureen, who stay here. And so they become subject matter experts, and they work for generation after generation of American diplomats like me. So let me give you a little bit of background. You heard a little bit about where I went to school. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I went to school, undergraduate at Boston, and then came to Paris for the first time and studied at Sciences Po. That was a absolutely fantastic experience for me. So I went off to London eventually for graduate school because I wanted to figure out, is it living overseas for me? Is it living abroad and working abroad? Or is it specifically France? And the answer to that question is yes. It is specific. It is working overseas, and it is also working for France and France. And I've been able in my career to marry those two things together in a very satisfying way. When I was at the London School of Economics, maybe like your colleagues here at Schiller, I met tons of people that were interested in becoming diplomats for their respective diplomatic services. And it was not a job that I had seriously considered until that point. But it was really the moment when I started saying, this might be the thing that actually works best for me. I went on to getting a law degree at Harvard Law School, as you heard. I practiced law in San Francisco, where I specialized in French corporate work. I had a bunch of French clients, and so they wanted to be able to converse and do their work in French with their American lawyer, and so that worked for very nicely for a season until I decided to actually become an American diplomat. To do that is in the American context, and I guess there are enough Americans among you, so let me describe briefly how it is that happens in the American Foreign Service. It's a very transparent and open process. It's just really long and really hard to get through each of the steps. We have essentially a three-step process. The first thing you do, you don't have to have a doctorate or a master's or even a bachelor's degree. Theoretically, I think literally everyone I know has at least gone to college, or university, but you really only have to have a high school degree in order to sit for the first exam, which is a written exam. And if you pass it, and now about 15% pass that, you're invited back for a full day of what's called the oral exam. And that's a whole series of role plays, and you write things down, you write stuff, and you get interviewed individually and in small groups. And they're assessing whether or not you have the stuff in order to be successful as an American diplomat. It's very broad, and so they're looking for people with a lot of different kinds of skill sets. And so if you pass that portion, then you have to get a security clearance, and that takes a long time indeed, because for us, if you're an American citizen, you have to have a top secret clearance, and that takes just a long time to get it sorted out, upwards of a year. And at that point, you go onto a very long list, and they call you up depending on how many diplomats they need to begin training in any given year. So for me, that was a long time ago. It was 28 years ago nearly that I've been doing this. And I joined the Foreign Service when about 1 in 100 people got through the process that I've just described to you. So there was a real sort of cachet to being able to get through the process, because it was quite strenuous and very selective, obviously. And it meant that really most of the people that got in were pretty smart folks, pretty clever, and could kind of function as diplomats. Some more successfully than others, of course, but that's fine. So it was a 1 in 100 thing. It's a little bit less now. They make it a little bit harder. They've added an extra step in it now, where you have to write a bunch of essays between the written exam and the oral exam. There's now an extra step where you have to write essays, and it gets sent off to somebody who lives in a deep, dark cave, and they read it and decide whether or not you have the stuff. It's just an added way to make it, I think, frankly, to weed people out so that only people that are serious kind of get into the process. So for 28 years, this is what I've been doing. So in our service, we are brought in as what's called a generalist officer. I'm a generalist. And so theoretically, I can get parachuted into any different kind of job that they want me to do. Early in our careers, that almost exclusively means that you do tours working in consular sections where you are issuing visas to people that want to travel to the United States, and you're the person in the window that they come up to try to convince that they're really only going to Disneyland, and that's fine. And that is a function, of course, because our law says if you tell us you're going as a tourist, you better prove that you're just going as a tourist. And if you're really going because your uncle has a gas station and you want to go pump gas for him in New Jersey, you can't go as a tourist to do that. So that becomes something that a lot of people do, and I did that in Singapore. I also did it briefly in Budapest. And then through that process, that's a consular function where you do non-immigrant visas, or you deal with the interests, the questions, and the problems of American citizens who are living in your country. So here in Paris, obviously we have tens of thousands of Americans who live here. They get married, they get divorced, they have children, they want to register their children as American citizens, they die, and all of these things happen, and the embassy sort of steps in at that point and has a role to play in terms of sort of facilitating their lives. And so if they want to vote, we had a ferocious effort last fall, for instance, to facilitate voting for Americans who wanted to vote in our presidential election. And that lives in our consular section. So it's a very, very critical function and really sort of job one for us. Now, apart from consular folks, there are people who are political specialists. That's what I am by specialty. I mostly am in analyzing political issues in whatever country I'm in and explaining it to Washington and vice versa. So there are, we call them coned. You belong to a cone, which is an area of specialty. So you have consular, political, economic, people that manage, who are management people. So they are in charge of everything having to do with running our lives, from registering our children in school to finding apartments for us to live in, to doing all of the work about our information systems and that sort of thing. That falls into the management cone. And then there's the public diplomacy cone. And that's where I'm currently serving, a little bit unusually, that people get to move around and do different kinds of jobs. I got this job specifically. I worked in Paris, as Claire was pointing out. It's my second tour here. And then I went, what happens in our service is, after you serve in a place like Paris, they say, we have a perfect follow-on assignment for you. We are sending you to Islamabad, Pakistan. And you think, great, super, absolutely great. It actually did make a lot of sense for me because my family could stay here in France, and they were settled and sorted, and it was unfortunately too dangerous for them to live in Pakistan at the time. So off I went to Pakistan, where I did a very interesting job. And the person who I worked for, I then went to Budapest, where I was the acting deputy ambassador for most of that tour. And then while I was there, my boss from Pakistan had come here, and she said, I need somebody who can speak great French and who can rebuild our press section. So David, will you come back to Paris? Not a hard thing to do, to push. You're pushing on an open door to say, do you want to come back to Paris? So I said, yeah, fine, we'll do that. So that's how I ended up here. So in the course of those 28 years, I went a little unusually. I repeated myself, which doesn't usually happen for folks. But I went from Singapore for 2 years to Budapest for 3 years, and then I moved home to the United States for 6 years. During that time, I was the France desk. I worked on a long-range planning staff for Secretary of State Colin Powell at the time. That was September 11th. I'm now dating myself as an old man, but that was, so I did that. Then I worked for a senator from Delaware who you might have heard of, named Joe Biden. So I worked for Joe Biden and worked directly for a guy named Tony Blinken, now the Secretary of State. So that's pretty cool that I got to work with both of them directly back then, and still now, obviously now in a sense, work with them. And then I learned Polish and I moved off to Warsaw. So then I went to Warsaw for 3 years, where I had not two, but 3 jobs. It changed every year. They kept moving places. I went back to the United States for 1 year to work for Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. And I worked specifically for a guy named Bill Burns, who was a career diplomat, who is now the head of our Central Intelligence Agency. So I was the guy who tracked Europe for them. So I had a big big job looking at not only at France, but really all of everything that was happening in European-American relations. And from there, I came to France for the first time. So I went to ENA for a year. For those of you who are here in France, I lived in Strasbourg while my family stayed here in Paris. And that was superb. And then worked in the political section here, went to Islamabad, and then went to Hungary for the second time. And then I came back here. So that brings you up to date as to the kind of crazy twists and turns. What you will hear in all of that is that I've spent a lot of time in Europe. My jobs in Washington and my jobs overseas have been overwhelmingly European focused. And that is a little bit unusual for American diplomats. We tend, as generalists, to move around a little bit more and from region to region. It's just sort of the way that it worked out for me. The jobs that came up were jobs that I grabbed and did, so that I ended up being a sort of subject matter expert. One of my deputies here, my colleague whose office I'm actually calling from, she was most recently in Bogota, Colombia, and she has moved all over the map, and she's done sometimes Europe, sometimes South America, sometimes that's a lot more geographic diversity than what I've had. And so there are a lot of different ways to do that. So we land in a job, and we of course know very little, or maybe know some, but maybe not a lot. Obviously for me, having served in Paris before, I had a pretty clear sense of how the embassy functioned. But normally you land in an embassy you've never stepped foot in a country that you've not necessarily spent any time in, and you barely speak the language, and you have what I like to say is about 6 weeks to be an idiot. And after 6 weeks and 1 day, everyone expects you to be a total expert in everything having to do with the country. So there's a very steep learning curve, but that's also part of what's so exciting and what's so intoxicating, frankly, about the career. And unlike anything else, I would say, journalism is perhaps a slight comparison where you get parachuted in, you're expected to know everything and figure it all out. But in that, in order to do our jobs at all effectively, we rely very heavily on people like Maureen, who actually has been here for a lot longer than me, and will stay here a lot longer after I'm forced to leave, dragging me away by my fingertips this time. But we're enormously the work that we do just simply wouldn't be possible without our Foreign Service national employees, our locally engaged staff, who keep things moving from day to day, week to week, while we kind of move in and out. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of who I am and how I got here and what it is I do. Here in the press section, and I'll finish with this and then bounce to anything that you actually want to talk about. Here, we handle everything having to do with press outreach. So that means classic press. I was just actually in a meeting with a new editor of a French periodical who just wanted to come in and introduce himself and ask, incidentally, for an interview with the President of the United States, just coincidentally. So that was the reason why he wanted to meet with us. But that's fine. It gives us a chance to kind of know each other and it's extraordinary after a year of working remotely, most of us from home, to actually be able to have a face-to-face meeting that's not on Zoom, because we've all gotten very good at Zoom. But we have a team that handles classic press, which is sort of newspapers, periodicals, that sort of thing. We have a whole team that handles social media on our side of the house, and they manage all of the embassy platforms, whether it is most actively on Facebook or on Instagram. Those are the two that we enter, the 3 platforms we use the most routinely. And then we have a small group that does research, and I have another group that handles disinformation, because unfortunately this is a very big part of our lives now, that we find that there are other state actors who shall remain unnamed, China and Russia, that are very interested in sending out information that only has the loosest connection with truth. And so we find that we're trying to track that very closely just to stay on top of it. And it's a very complicated part of our mission. We're trying to do it smartly. And with that, I think I'll just leave it with that, Claire, Rafe, if it's okay, and we'll bounce it to your students to talk about what they want to talk about.
David, thank you very much for your presentation. It's impressive, your career. The idea of the conference, the idea of the
opinion.
There, now they're muted. I think you can talk. But you're muted, Rafi.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by the fact that you speak French, and you said that you learned Polish before going to Warsaw. So I suppose foreign languages, you're very at ease with learning a new language every 3 years, or how is it that how do you manage that?
I like to say I make a fool out of myself so easily in English that I don't hesitate to do it in a lot of other languages. So I actually, we do not have, unlike a lot of other diplomatic services, there's no requirement that we speak a foreign language when we start, because again, that would be considered elitist, and we are not an elite service in that sense. And so therefore we will train people in languages, and we have a huge language school. It's actually where I'm going to go work next. A huge language school to train in over 60 languages, world languages. So if you are going to a job where it's required to learn Bengali or Arabic or Swahili, we'll teach you that language. I learned, as a diplomat, I learned both Polish and Hungarian. And along the way, I had French already. And along the way, I learned German, Spanish, and Italian. So I have 7 languages, which is a lot. I don't speak them all fluently, but I can get myself into trouble in all 7.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Well, we would like to, David, some of our students, they asked, they want to run for the Foreign Service. They are US nationals, and they asked me about the process, the 3 steps you spoke about in your presentation, the written exam, the essay, and the oral exam. And they were wondering if you could give some advices for them. I know your profile, you studied at Sciences Po Paris, so you have all this general culture, you have political science, I imagine, or I don't know if it's economics or political science. Your profile, your studies, I think it helped to prepare for the exam. I'm pretty sure for that. And our students, most of them, they are doing international relations and diplomacy, so they would have a wide range of theory of international relation, workshop in diplomacy. But what could be other advices that maybe if you could speak a little bit about these 3 steps, so they could be able to prepare, because they feel there is a barrier to them.
Sure, thanks for the question. That's great, and it is the process, as I explained, is involved and a little bit tortured for people that are going through it. So I guess the first thing that I would say to you is if you fail at any given step, just jump back in the next year and do it again. There is a very, very long track record of people that try and finally get through all 3 steps. So it takes, do not be discouraged, I think is message number 1 that I would want to leave with people. Message number 2 is, in fact, coming out of your undergraduate or master's degree studies in something like international relations, you are better able to tackle this exam than virtually at any other point in your life. By the time I did it, I had been practicing law for 4 years, and I was, going through this. I was a lawyer, and so I was not necessarily dealing every single day with kind of the ideas around the Foreign Service. I will say, as a lawyer, I think it helped me a lot, because I was able in the exams, when they would throw a question at me and they'd say, is it this way or is it that way? And I would say, it depends. And then, which was, I mean, most people feel, oh my God, I got to choose between these 2. And it's not that. They just want to see how you handle an awkward, hard question. And you can say, well, it might be this way if you assume this fact pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, or it could be that way if you assume another fact pattern 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, I think you have to be flexible, and that obviously I got through the process, so that somehow worked for me. So I do think Well, a couple of things. The written exam, so I'll take it item by item. The written exam changes and morphs from year to year, and it changes depending on what they need. And so the year that I took it and passed, it was, they were really looking for management officers. It was an undersubscribed area of our service. And so there were all of these questions on the exam that said, according to the management theory of Powell, and I didn't know who Powell was, and I'd never read about their management theory. So you can assume blah, 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 blah about, a workforce. And I had no clue as to what that was. And so all you can do is make an educated guess and say, well, it's not likely to be that or this. And I just guessed. And so that's another thing to suggest. Just answer the questions to the best of your ability. It is a really like a form of intellectual jeopardy, the written exam. It covers a lot of different kind of things. And I had stuff from, economic, natural resources in Central Africa. I had stuff on French African literature and the Negritude literature movement in the 1920s. It just goes all over the place. And so it's kind of interesting. And that's why when you're an undergraduate or fresh out of school, you're actually pretty likely to maybe have encountered this stuff. The conventional wisdom used to be, and I think this is still probably pretty good, if you look at the New York Times every day and you scan it, or you scan it regularly and you have a sense of what's going on, big currents in foreign relations, you're likely to stumble on a couple of things they'll have on the exam. But there's no particular way to study for it and crash for it. You just have to you have to be sort of generally well-read and generally conversant in the issues of the day. So that's the written exam. This new second piece that I've described, and by new, I mean it's existed for probably 15 years, so it's been around for a long time now, is this, if you pass that, then they send you 6 questions and you have to write 1 paragraph answer to each of the 6 questions. And you send those things off, and they're, as I say, they're read and graded by some strange person who doesn't see the light of day for seasons, endless seasons, a little bit like the pandemic, right? But in any event, I have no advice about that. Happily, it did not exist when I was there. But I think what they're obviously trying to do is to see that you can string together a cogent argument, right, concisely and persuasively. And if you can do that, then you get on to the oral exam. And the oral exam is a pretty intense experience because it lasts for about 8 hours long. And so, as I say, you go through all of these different role plays. Sometimes it's you with one other person, sometimes it's you with 2 other people, and that's often in a very classic good cop, bad cop. You're an officer at the embassy, and the embassy is being stormed, and what do? And you come up with an answer, right? And the answer that they're looking for is that you don't fall apart. And you don't, I think you could almost say anything as long as you don't I don't know, I'd be scared and I'd get on a plane and I'd fly home. No, that's the wrong answer. So you just come up with something that is plausible and is defensible, and then you're fine, I think. Sometimes you're put in a role play with 3 or 4 other people that are being examined, and you have these assessors that are sitting around the corners of the room, each with a clipboard, furiously taking notes. I will say the one thing that is really weird about the oral exam is that they train our folks who give the exam to not give feedback. So you realize that in most interactions, we get all kinds of nonverbal cues about whether or not you're making sense, whether people can follow. They're not going like this, or they're going, ah, or they're smiling, or they're like, yeah, okay, got it. And none of that happens. So it's a little bit like talking to a wall, and that's a very bizarre part of the experience, frankly. But you just roll with it, right? And so I think that really what they're looking for rather consistently is flexibility and an ability to think on your feet and to come up with defensible answers. Those are the big issues. That's the big qualities that they're looking for in any given officer. I hope that answers your question.
No, yes, thank you very much. We have a question from one of our students, IRD students, Mattia Nicolek. Mattia, yes, we'll take your question, please.
Hello, Mr. Van Cleve. Thank you for coming and telling us your story. One question that I have is, I passed the FSAT test, the examination, but I didn't make it past the evaluation stage. What would you say, what can a person do to make it past the evaluation stage? Is it to get a higher test score, to write a better essay, or how would
So
that?
by the evaluation stage, do you mean the short answer second step or the oral assessment?
The evaluation stage. So the way they worked for me is I first wrote those paragraphs that you were talking about, those little essays.
Yeah.
I submitted that. Then I signed up to take the FSAT. I took the test, I passed it. And then the next stage was the evaluation stage where they look at all of your, the test score and your abilities. And I didn't make it past that.
Right. So did you, so in the place that you got tripped up was the final oral assessment stage?
Yes, yes.
So just do it again.
Do it again? Okay.
Just do it again. And go into it with the confidence that it'll work or it won't work, and your life will be great regardless. Yeah, honestly, there are a lot of ways to have a career in foreign policy. This is an awesome one. It is really great. So you should keep trying, but it's not the only one. And so just keep that in mind and let that be the kind of balance that you want to strike when you're going through the oral assessment.
I see, and thank you. And if I could just ask one more question, since I'm also located in Paris, I was wondering, does the U.S. Embassy give any internship opportunities for American students living abroad?
So we have two different kinds for Americans, absolutely, yes. We have both local interns and American interns. The local interns, that is a very routine kind of thing, and they sort of cycle through, and it is easier to do because they don't need a security clearance. And so we very routinely have local employees. Very hard to do that if you're an American. If you're an American, you go through the State Department's intern process, which is competitive, and where you also need not a top secret clearance, but a secret clearance. And getting that done in a timely way is very complicated and really frustrating. We offer internships, and fully half of them, they don't get their internship, their clearances in time to be able to follow through on it. So the piece of advice on that is do it early. And if you find out, yes, we like you, and there might be an opportunity in Paris, but the next thing you need to do is fill out this 27-page long security clearance thing. Do it that weekend and submit it, because if you wait a month, then you'll be behind 350 other people, right? So just jump on it fast.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Bet.
Thank you, Mattia. Thank you, David, for the answers. We will. There is a question in the chat, and then I'll take Leah's question. There is a question. What areas of studies would you recommend? Economics, law, political science, or international relation, or protocols, or all of them, or something?
The quick answer is yes, right? I mean, they're looking for people that have broad knowledge. So they're looking for, so if you love economics and you think you want to be an economic owned officer in the State Department, awesome, you should pursue that. That now, many of us, like me, as soon as I see math and numbers, it like makes me think of math, and I want to run in the other direction. So that's not my thing, but that's fine. I mean, I know that about myself. So it's really the question of what it is that kind of what it is that you like, and if that's international relations or political science, that is a very classic area. But if it's Gaelic literature, then you should study Gaelic literature.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
We will take another question from Leah. If you could present yourself and ask the question, please. Leah? Yes.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Leah. I have a two-part question. It's at the beginning end and at the end. And first of all, I do apologize. I don't have my video on. So the first question is, okay, so I am in the DC area. So if I'm interested in working at the embassy, where do I go? I mean, if I'm in the DC area, and if I'm not in the DC area, if I'm in the DC area, I'm in my country. For example, I'm in Kenya, my country. Where do I go? Where do I go, to the American embassy, or is there a porthole, a universal porthole, or a website to go to apply in the Kenyan embassy or the State Department here in the DC area? Does that make sense?
Leah, by Kenyan embassy, do you mean the U.S. embassy in Kenya, or do you mean the Kenyan embassy in Washington?
The U.S. embassy in Kenya.
In Nairobi, yeah.
In Nairobi.
So they will have for local interns. So here in France, we vet and run our own program for locals who want to work at the embassy. That's done out of Paris. For Americans, it's done out of a centralized portal in that's what I was talking to your colleague about. That's handled centrally out of Washington. So you would want to, if you're Kenyan and you want to work in Nairobi but happen to be living in Washington right now, then you want to get online and see what the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi is advertising in terms of its interns. There will almost certainly be a connection that you can pursue that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question? And I'm in the DC area, and sorry about this time. I'm an American. The website is the State Department. Is the State Department website? Is that correct?
Right. It's the departmentofstate.gov, and you'll see there's a link to interns.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Leah. We will take another question from the chat. I'm reading. What about students from other countries who are neither local nor American? For example, students with other nationalities in France, in Paris. Are they eligible for internship in the U.S. Embassy in Paris, for example?
Yes, is the quick answer. Yes, they are. There's no restriction.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll take the question from Stephanie. I'll give the students first. I think Stephanie, if you could present yourself.
Hi. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Which program you are, and what, please, your questions, if you could, and where you come from eventually.
Oh, okay, so I'm here. I'm representing two people actually, because the other person is stuck at work and she couldn't join. So she asked me to ask her question for her. So we can start with hers. I will talk about her background. So she is, she's Dutch by nationality, but she has like an African root. So she's half Dutch, half African, but her citizenship is Dutch. And she lives in France. She's been living there for a long time now. She speaks French. She's working in France, and she studied international security, and I think it's Sciences Po. I'm not so good with that. So yeah, international security, yeah, with Sciences Po. So it's someone with her background like this. How is she gonna go through the process? And then what, I don't know, what can she apply for?
Well, it's a quick answer. She sounds like she could be a Dutch diplomat if she wanted, and she would have to pursue that through the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, presumably, if that's what she wanted to do, to be the equivalent of what I am for the United States. If she wants to stay in Paris, what she would be looking at, not only at our embassy but at any embassy, is to be hired as a locally engaged staff, and that would be possible. And as I say, the number of locally engaged staff outnumber rather significantly the diplomatic staff. So there are a lot of opportunities. I will say they're very competitive jobs, and people tend to like them a lot. Not only because you get to work with charming people like me, but it's actually, I actually think there's actually some truth to that. For many people who come to work in American embassies anywhere, they're pretty interested in the American style, the American approach to things, which is often markedly different from what the local business environment is like.
David,
Okay,
maybe,
so
sorry, maybe I can just add a little, just to add a point there. If you are interested in working for any of the US embassies as a local staff, whether you're French and you want to be at this embassy, or if it's in another country, those jobs are just advertised on the embassy websites. You don't have to go through the State Department website for that. But of course, for the foreign service officers and the internships, those are through the State Department website that I put in the chat.
okay,
Thank
okay.
you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Well, if there is no questions, I would like, David, if it's possible, for our students in the International Relations and Diplomacy program, what kind of, we spoke about the exams, we spoke about the situations, you spoke about being able to answer questions, to react correctly, but have general culture. What kind of personality, is there any profile for foreign service officers? Is there anything recommended in terms of, and is there minimum languages to speak? And then the last question would be, do they go for difficult countries for their first mission? I know that after you are recruited, you would not choose the country where you go to serve, I think. And could they go to difficult countries, and how should they be worried for that?
Okay, well, so 3 different questions. Let me answer them in turn. For your first question, again, there's absolutely no reason why you should study one thing versus another thing. So you should study what you like. And now I dare say, if you are a chemical engineer and you totally don't like anything about international relations, you're not likely to be successful in the Foreign Service exam. But if you are somebody who's interested in foreign policy, foreign affairs, international relations, you're probably already studying something that is going to give you the sort of general knowledge that you need in order to be successful at the exams and to get a crack at joining the service. So that's the answer to your first question. Answer to your second question, actually, I mentioned this before, we have no language requirement. So you just have to speak English. And so you would have to be able to speak English pretty well to join, but we'll train you in anything else. So if you can't even learn Spanish, which is pretty straightforward, easy language, then we'll teach you something like Bahasa Indonesia, which is even easier to learn. So there's a big effort. To make people conversant in languages. So that's the main thing. And your third question, now I'm forgetting what it is. It was, what, you tell me your third question again?
The first mission you go abroad,
it was serving overseas in a difficult place. So what happens, I'll tell you how it works for us, right? So what happens is you start at a long orientation program. You have either a very small class like the kind that I had, which was 18 to upwards of 100 people, depending on how many. And they will then say to you, there are 18 of you, and here are the 18 jobs you can bid on. And it's a little bit like the Hunger Games, right? So you're sort of like, okay, well, I want to go here, I want to go there. The thing that's remarkable is that in a group of large or small, there's a lot of self-selection already. You'll have people that are very committed to going to Africa, for instance, or who are very committed to going to South America, and so they really throw all their weight into those jobs. And then you go through a process of kind of applying for the various positions, and then they take all that back and they then match bodies to jobs, and they figure out what makes sense. And that's not necessarily what you want, but it's when you're available, what kind of training you have, if you have the language already, or if you have time to learn the language. There are a variety of things that kind of go into it. So when I joined, I was the odds-on favorite of my group of 18 to go either to Bombay or to Beijing. And so I was pretty sure I was going to go to Bombay or Beijing. And Flag Day, when they literally come in with flags of the countries and they say, David Van Cleve, here's your Indian flag, you're going to Bombay. And then you go, woo, and you're happy about that. So that was a Monday. On the Friday beforehand, so we've gone through this huge long process to, candidate for each of these places. They said, oh, we're changing it up and we're adding Singapore. So if you want to bid on Singapore, you can go ahead and bid on Singapore. And I said, sure, I'll bid on Singapore. And That's where I went. So in other words, things can change and you have to be, for our service, you have to have what's called worldwide availability, and you have to be able to move around. And there's increasingly, of course, for people, because of there are many difficult areas of the world. And so now there's a lot of pressure for us to serve in some of those positions. And so you have to be cognizant of that, and you have to figure out what's the logical time. For me, going to Pakistan, for instance, which was a difficult and dangerous place to work, and I loved it, incidentally. It made a lot of sense for me because my family was here already in France, well settled, well sorted, and instead of moving them, I could keep them here, which gave them even longer in a very nice, safe, lovely place that they were comfortable in. So it made a lot of sense for me to go on what's called an unaccompanied tour at that point. And so off I went to Islamabad, and I was able to get back and forth. It was easier to get back to France than it was to go all the way back to Washington if they'd gone home.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, David. We have a question from a student from our master students in international relations and diplomacy, Omar Abdullah. He asked, the interest you have in foreign affairs or policy, where did it come from? And did you acknowledge it earlier in your years? So have you always dreamed to be a foreign officer, or it's something that you
I studied political science and not international relations when I was at university. And that was in some measure because I was so interested in American politics as well, that I didn't want to just keep it limited to outside of the United States. But as I said, I then went on to get a master's degree in international relations because I was really, the thing that has always sparked for me, and I can't even explain why. I traveled a lot when I was a kid. I've always had a lot of wanderlust, and so just really curious about the world, always wanted to move around, and obviously very interested in languages as well. So it all sort of coalesced for me in that sense. And for me, I didn't seriously consider diplomacy until I was in an international relations master's program. And from there, it really kind of blossomed.
So are you saying, David, international relation the students who specialize in international relation is the best fit for?
No, I'm not. You keep trying
no,
to
I'm
get
just saying. No, I'm just.
You should study what you want to study, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to, you should study what it is that you love, right? For me, it's what I loved, and so it actually, synced up pretty well. But it's not. There's no steadfast requirement that you'd study, diplomatic history as opposed to studying German literature, right? You could be just as or Russian history or something else. So you could be very successful with any of those.
But it's a good step for preparation then.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll take. Is there any other questions? Mattia, do you have any other? Oh, I have two questions, Mikael Garud and Clara.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, yes, please.
My name is Mikael Gao, and I study international relations and diplomacy, but I am in the Madrid campus. So I wanted to know if the internship requirements are the same for Paris and Madrid, for example, if I wanted to conduct an internship at the US Embassy in Madrid.
Look on the website for the US Embassy in Madrid. They could be a little bit different. They're probably similar, but they are aimed at the population right there. So if you want to work in Madrid, it might make a lot of sense, and you can put forward an application there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'll take the question from Clara.
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering about if you had any tips of how to learn languages in an effective way. I'm Spanish, I speak some English, and I'm currently studying French and Russian. I'm only 17, but I want to learn any languages I can. And since you talk quite a few. I was wondering if you had, yes, any recommendations I could follow.
Well, I think actually my language learning experience is consistent with the language learning that we do in the Foreign Service as well, which is to really force people into using the language inelegantly with tons of mistakes, and so you sound like a complete moron, and you just keep pushing. So the way that we do it in the U.S. Foreign Service is they actually have done all kinds of research, and they realize they can only teach you for about 6 hours a day, because after 6 hours you just fall apart. You can't handle it anymore. And so for 6 hours a day, you're forced, you go into these very small classrooms. Now it's all done online, but that will switch back to a more classic form. And they just pound the language into you, and they force you to use it all the time, and they don't flip back into English. And it is agonizing and but effective ultimately. And I think for me at least, what I found was, obviously I'm very comfortable talking, regardless of what language it is. I'm very comfortable kind of jumping in and just kind of working it out. And so I'm very used to making a lot of mistakes, and that's fine. And I'll make the same mistake 600 or maybe 6,000 times, and then all of a sudden it clicks in and I get it right. So that's that would be what I would encourage. I think the French language conundrum and the challenge in France is that they have a different pedagogical model here, where the students are judged so harshly that in language learning, people hold back because they know their teachers are going to jump up and be like, "Maureen, you're an idiot. How could you have done that? That was absolutely terrible." And they do it in front of everyone, so it's completely horrible. The experience is so terrible that, in fact, you're just like, "I'll just sit here and shut up and not say a word." And that's wrong. If you want to learn language, you got to jump in and you got to make. You have to say, "Yep, I'm absolutely terrible at this, but I'm gonna push through until I get there."
Thank you. Do you think there's any language that's more useful than others? Of course, English, French.
As someone who speaks Hungarian, what do you?
Yeah.
For instance, you know what? Sure, there are world languages that are much more useful. So if you have French or Spanish, then that's going to be easier than Italian, say. But then if you have Portuguese, you can serve in a couple of different places. That's kind of interesting, you know. So there are a lot of different places that you should find a language that you like and just go for it.
Well, thank you very much, David. Thank you, Clara. We will take the last questions from the, and then maybe we are almost 5, so we don't want to take more time from you, David. Thank you. There is a question from, what is your favorite place where you worked in the past? And could you give an advice for a human, for the one who would like to work in NGOs? And maybe if you could share one experience with the students that you think it's at your beginning, at the beginning of your journey, a story or something.
Let me see if I keep hold of those 3 in case I miss one of them. But let's jump in on that. In terms of an early experience, I'll take your 3rd question first. When I was working in Budapest the first time, I had the human rights portfolio. That's not unusual for a new political officer. So the U.S. Congress requires that we write a report every year on the state of human rights in the country where you're serving. I was the person who did the one in Hungary. And one of the big issues that we had there was the treatment and the conditions of life for Hungarian Roma. And a sizable minority population in Hungary, almost 10% of the population, and people who had lived with deep discrimination and in great poverty, overwhelmingly in great poverty, not exclusively. But so I went out with an NGO leader one night, and He took me to the roughest part of Budapest, and we were talking. We went to meet prostitutes who were selling themselves, and so that I could buy them a cup of coffee and they could tell me about their lives and how really distressing they were. You can imagine it was absolutely awful, but quite interesting for me. And that ended, and the next day in the morning I jumped into a car and had to represent the ambassador at this incredibly opulent reopening of a historic library where the president of the country was 3 seats down from me in the same row. And I thought, this is an astonishing moment where, you know, in the space of 12 hours, I am seeing these two starkly contrasting experiences of what it means to be Hungarian. And it was super fascinating for me. That was one of many moments when I'm like, okay, so this job is super cool. It's super amazing. And I really loved it. I can't give you, I cannot say what my favorite place is, because honestly, I think I'm not unusual in this. If you really love the Foreign Service, you sort of leave a little bit of your heart everywhere. And the great surprise, of course I love France. I came right back. Of course I love Hungary. I've served there twice. We're building a home in Hungary. We adopted our daughter in Hungary. We have a very strong tie to Hungary. Love those places. But I expected, I was underwhelmed when we moved to Poland. I thought, and we loved Poland. We just loved everything about the history and the place and the language, and everything about it was extraordinary. And even when I went to Islamabad, which is dangerous and limiting, I loved big parts of living in Pakistan, and I really came to appreciate just how hard it is for the overwhelming majority of Pakistanis who just want to live in peace and tranquility, and how challenging that is there. It's very heartbreaking. But I love that. So now I got your third question, your first question, second question, I forgot. So you'd have to remind me what it is.
The second question is, what advice for a humanitarian? What advice would you give them?
NGOs, right?
NGOs, yes.
I worked for an NGO actually before I went to graduate school. It's a great way of getting involved in a sub. I was working in an American NGO doing poverty, working in impoverished areas in the southern part of the United States. And it's a great way if you're interested in working in international relations to get involved. So yes, if you have taste for that, pursue it.
Great, thank you very much. I think we can, thank you very much, David, for all this sharing the experience, all these advices, all these sharing these information for our students. I think it's really beneficial. We are honored for this conference to have you with us with Schiller University. I think the IRD students, they learn a lot, and these questions, actually what you said, your career is amazing, is impressive. I rarely, I see different trajectory, different places, Islamabad, Hungary, France, your studies, your academic, but also your career. So thank you very much. From our students, they are very, I think you answered most of the questions they were asking to me, and I want to thank you for answering all the questions they raised also and during this meeting, and Maureen for helping us to, I reached out to her to organize this conference, and I would like to thank her, to thank Maureen for that too, for accepting and giving the students the opportunity. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you all, and good luck. Go for it.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.